All right. In this lesson, we are going to use a blur filter and a mask. So this lesson reviews masking and how to use filters. And we're also going to do a review of an adjustment layer and the clone stamp tool to take away her mole. Okay, so what we're going to do is, and you can either use this photo or you can use any portrait that you want. And our objective today is to turn this to black and white, to clone stamp out the mole, and nothing against the mole. It's just that we haven't used a clone stamp for a while, so I want to get some practice with that. And then also add Gaussian blur and mask out mask it out in a faded type of way. Meaning we're going to keep this eye in focus, and we're going to blur it so that it's a progression from less blurry to more blurry. And you can already see that the background's kind of blurry and her left shoulder's kind of blurry, and that's fine. But we want to kind of intensify this. We want to make sure that just the eye is in focus, and then everything else is kind of scaled out so that it progressively gets more and more blurry. When you do that, it really draws the viewer's eye directly to the point that's in focus, which in this case will be the eye. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and clone stamp out the mole. So what we're going to do, in the past, we've just created a brand new layer and renamed it clone stamp tool, but that clogs up, that bloats the file size by duplicating a layer. So another way to do the clone stamp tool is we're going to click brand new layer right here, and we're going to let's go ahead and label that clone out mole, right? And if you're not using this portrait, then you can and you're using a different portrait that doesn't have a mole, try to clone stamp out something else in the picture. Now we have a blank layer, and we know that because it's checkered. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on this background layer right here, and we're going to click on our clone stamp tool, and make sure that it's a soft edge brush so that it blends in well. And we're going to click on the zoom tool, and we're going to just zoom in onto the mole. And from here, we're going to go back to the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to change the opacity so that it kind of blends in a little bit. I like to do a lower opacity, and make sure that it's a soft edge brush like one of these, not a hard edge. And what we're going to do is we're going to sample by holding down Alt, clicking, and we're going to sample from the background layer, and we're going to place it on this blank layer. And I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to click right here, sample, click on the top, and just slowly but surely click back on the background layer, click from here, click back on the clone out mole, and sample that out. And you can see slowly but surely, after a few times, we're going to make that mole disappear. And you're like, well, where'd it go? Well, really, it's still there, but we covered it up with this clone out mole. All right, so it's still there. It's just that we have this layer that can hide it. So, if you're working and you're like, well, I do want that mole after all you have to do is turn the eye on and off. Okay, let's go ahead and do the blur now. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag the background layer and make a copy of it, and make sure that it's above. Drag it above so that it's on top, and I want you to title this Gaussian blur. Okay, so type in Gaussian blur. It's on the top, and what we want to do now is go to Filter, go to Blur, Gaussian blur, and if you take a look, you can take a look kind of what the Gaussian blur does. If the more pixels, the more blurry it is. Let's do about 15 pixels and hit OK. And now we want to make the eye sharp and progressively get more and more blurry. So to do that, we're going to add a mask right here, and we're on our mask, and remember, black burns through. Now with a paintbrush, if I were to just do 100% and do something like that, that looks really, really bad. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to change the opacity of the brush because we want a nice blend, and change it to, let's say, maybe 8. And I'm going to start off with a brush that's really big, and you'll see what I'm doing in a second. What I'm going to do is I'm on my paint brush, I'm on black, the opacity is 8, and I'm going to just click a few times around the corners. Right? I clicked maybe 4 times. Now I am going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to click just around the corners, kind of in a circle, and you can kind of see what I'm doing with the mask right here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm just, each time I'm making it small, the brush size smaller and smaller. And like so. Like so, and eventually you're really just going to get the eye. Okay. Now take a look at that effect. It has, if you take a look at the filter, that you'll see a dark black spot, and then it progressively goes from a gray to white, and that's kind of what you want. So now we have, instead of everything being in focus except for the background and her shoulder, we've done a nice kind of progression and softened it up a little bit. So we used the filter and we used the mask. We used the clone. We cloned out the mole. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to turn it black and white using an adjustment layer. So click right here, adjustment layer. Let's go to hue and saturation. And let's just move the saturation down a little bit, all the way to -100. Now, and we can rename that black and white. So now what you can see that we've turned it black and white, we've cloned out the mole, and we've added a blur with a mask and used the mask with it as well. And we never made one destructive edit, which is great. We can turn the eyes off, and we can work from scratch again, or we can work from this point, or if we just want it black and white, or if we want it blurred in black and white but we want the mole. So we have a lot of options. Okay?